Okay, I'm going to call this meeting of Policy and Priorities to order, having seen that we have a quorum. The first item of business is the adoption of the agenda. Moved by John Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wonder if it would be in order, since folks are in the audience dealing with two issues that are down in the agenda, if we switch the agenda to have 5.1 and 5.3 before 5.2 and 4.1.
Fine, so switch the order of items 5 and 4 and switch the order of the items in 5 to deal with
Do 5.1 and 5.3 in front of 5.2, just so that the folks that are here can have their matters dealt with. And
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I sense a consensus, so let me call that question on the amendment. All in favor? Passed. And I guess on the amended agenda? Passed also, right? What do I do? Sign? Is there any pecuniary interest to be?
No, Mr. Chair.
No, Mr. Chair.
So then moving in the agenda to number 5, old business, to deal first with 5.1, the chicane update. Let me find that. The Policy and Priorities Committee received Public Works report chicane update for information. Comments? I'm being told that I have to say that Councillor King has moved that. Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I want to say to staff, thanks very much for the update. It does appear that the chicane is working when it comes to speeds, and that's the purpose of it. Lots of work that the director has done to study this particular chicane. And I especially appreciate the study that was done there on, what page is that now? It's blocked here. It's not numbered, page 6. With some improvements and things, but meeting the criteria and how compliant it is, except for, I guess, the bike lane, which I don't think is no actions required at this time. I thought it was interesting, Mr. Chair, that the speed appeared to pick up after those that are going northerly, sort of they get through it and then they kind of pick up their speed. But those approaching, coming south on Haste, actually do slow down ahead of it. So it appears that it's working. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Comments? Questions? Councillor Lane, and then Councillor Christie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to reiterate what the mayor said, and that it was put in as traffic calming to slow people down. It appears that it's done it. It's like anything else when you have change. Some people will like it, some people won't like it. You'll never please everyone. But I think it's achieved what it was designed to do, and I say carry on with what we've got.
Thank you. Councillor Christie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to our director, I note that at the rural-urban transition area that we're still seeing high speeds relative to the posted speed limit. I wondered whether we are giving some consideration to a speed bump at that transition, or what methodology we might apply to that, if any. I'm just curious to see what the thoughts are.
Through you, Mr. Chair. At this point, we haven't investigated anything further. Like I said in the report, the 85th percentile can give you, thank you, an indication that speeding is an issue, but it can also indicate that the posted speed limit is set too low. So it does mean opening it up a little bit and having a look into both considerations. And if that's the direction I'm given, we can absolutely continue. I haven't had any complaints about speed in that area, in that transition so much. They've mostly been focused around the chicane in the neighborhood area, but we can absolutely continue on the path and see what else we can do as we move out of town.
Thank you, Madam Director. Others? Councillor King?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I noted late this afternoon that there was a resident who sent an email, and I think that I had very limited time to review that email, but I believe that the major concern was the safety of people passing through that area as opposed to the reduction of speed either before or after the chicane. And I am just interested in knowing whether any further consideration will be given to this, given the fact that there is further information that has come forward today, but obviously isn't on the agenda.
Thank you, Councillor King. Madam Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I haven't seen that email. I'm not too sure what the nature of the concern was, but if you forward it, we can certainly comment on it at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. I will forward it.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments from councillors? If not, I have one, but
I'd just like to make a brief comment, Mr. Chair. There were some concerns expressed around snow removal, and I have to say that I think our staff's been very responsive to that. There were some concerns about snow piling up on the end of the driveways nearest the chicane. And by the time I got out there to have a look at it, staff had come in with a smaller unit and had cleared the driveway, and it was fully open and operational. So kudos to our staff for being responsive. So I just wanted to put that out there, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you. So I have a comment, if I may. I know that one of the comments that I had received from residents interested in that area had to do with the fact that the physical location of the chicane may in fact represent some sort of barrier or interruption to the potential placement of a driveway on property that is hard by that. And I wonder whether, Madam Director, you would want to address that, or perhaps it's a planning issue, I don't know, but are either one aware of that and can speak to it, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if this is the same resident that contacted Public Works, there's concern about a property value effect with the placement of the chicane in relation to where the driveway would be. And staff did follow up to make sure that that placement wouldn't hinder a driveway from being constructed. It might not be exactly where the resident had planned on it, but the access to the property was still possible with the placement of the chicane where it is.
Okay.
I'm just not certain this is the same concern that we've had, as we have had the residents immediately in the area saying, as was noted there, they had some concerns about backing out of their driveway with the placement of the chicane, and that's partly where some of the adjustments during construction were made to try to accommodate that.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Director. I don't know how many properties would be affected by it, not that many, so it's probably the same resident. You had the issue, you've examined it, you've responded to it. Thank you very much. Any other comments with regard to the report? Then the motion is the Policy and Priorities Committee receive the Public Works Report chicane update for information. Any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. And that is passed. Let us now move to item, let me see if I can find it here. Here we go. 5.3, Pickwick Place lighting update. Moved by Councillor Kersey, the Policy and Priorities Committee receive the Public Works Report Pickwick Place lighting update for information. Any commentary, discussion? Councillor Kersey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a couple of questions, if I may, through you to our director. The second look at the current light standards that are there confirm that there are holes in the wood, but that the wood is, for the most part, still in decent condition. I wondered if we have any plans to either recoat those with some thin layer of wood, or whether we were thinking of filling the holes with a wood filler and refinishing, like with paint or something very simple that would extend the life until such time as we take another look at it in 2020-21.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there wasn't discussion of any plans to do any work with the wood paint at the moment. The contractor didn't find any structural or electrical deficiencies. We didn't plan to at this time.
Along the same lines, the local residents had expressed some concern about the current state of the gardens there and some of the trees that are beyond their useful life. I wonder if there's any thought around going in and doing a cleanup and doing some limited revegetation of the area, and the local residents have agreed to take on the maintenance of that once it was cleaned up. I don't know that we need to go to the full extent of doing it, but I wondered if doing a cleanup and take a look at it and see what would be involved would be worth undertaking.
Madam Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, currently we maintain about half of our beds in town. The beds were prioritized really based on location and feature beds. So at this point, we've had a transition with the supervisor of beautification. There's been some discussion just about in his orientation with the current person that manages all the horticulture, whether there's any need for change. He's aware of the longstanding issue with the residents having concern about the state of the bed, but without pulling other beds off the list, we wouldn't necessarily be able to add this one. But that said, he's aware of the issue, and we're hopeful that maybe we might be able to juggle something around, even if something comes off the list for this year and next year, and then comes back on and we cycle these through. That's the hope.
Great, well, that's good. If it's on his radar and he can have a look at it, that would be terrific. And lastly, Mr. Chair, I wonder if in the interim, before we transition to a full LED program, if those lights that are currently there could be furnished with LED bulbs. If there, there's so many varieties of LED bulbs out there, sometimes it's just a matter of screwing them in and it changes you from incandescent or high voltage sodium to LED, and I just wondered whether we had a look at that.
Madam Director, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we discussed whether there could be the opportunity to just change the bulbs out. But as was noted in that report, we were trying to step back and figure out what we were doing here and why, and what the trigger for the whole project was, because it was before my time. So the LED initiative was really because it was identified as deficient and a contender for a small pilot project to convert to LED, which is kind of where things all got carried away. So if the original driver, and I'm not aware of it, is to test this neighborhood for LED light, absolutely, but it would still not be roadway illumination in conformance with the standard. So yes, it would be a great pilot project just to see the difference in the lighting in the neighborhood, but I'm not sure that's in line with what the intention was with the LED conversion. The pilot on Effingham, that was a different one.
Thank you, Madam Director. What I was more thinking of was just from an energy saving standpoint, and perhaps to pilot an LED light, to just take what is there, take the bulb out, put an LED bulb in, see how the illumination is, If the neighbors are, the residents in that area are satisfied with that degree of illumination, such that when we get down the road in 2021, we'll at least have had some feedback with respect to LED lighting in that area. No, I have no idea of the cost or the type of lights that are there with respect to, are they just simple incandescent bulbs that could be changed out, or are they high-pressure sodium or what have you? So that would impact on the cost. I don't know whether you have that information or not.
Madam Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have that total information at this point. We would contract that out. We don't have the means to meter any, we wouldn't have the means to measure any savings because this isn't a metered area. The Effingham project was done that way to see what savings are, what the light effects are to motorists, comments from residents and such. So that data might be a little bit more relatable for when we're preparing for the LED project. But that said, it's not an impossible initiative to start if that's the council's direction.
Councillor Kersey?
I'm not sure where we want to go with this, Mr. Chair. It's been on our radar for a long period of time. I think the residents will be pleased probably just to have the status quo, other than perhaps have the gardens to have a look at and cleaned up, get rid of the dead wood and if we can clean any underbrush out there. And then they're willing to take it on and maintain it through till 2021 when we give it a more serious look at. So I'd be pleased if our new beautification manager could take a look at it and give us a report back what might be done for small money that get us over that period of time that might satisfy the residents of that area as well, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So you're asking that we provide direction for a report with regard to that? Maybe as a footnote to that report can be something with regard to the Effingham project as well, because I think it's time we maybe heard how that was going also.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, I think you had...
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Just to I'll use this as a springboard if you'll allow me, to the overall LED replacement of streetlights. I know that the report says it's forecasted for down the road, and I wondered if some of that work might be considered sort of this year for next year's budget. I know that there are organizations, businesses, et cetera, that could do that work on behalf of the town. Many municipalities have done it, although I know that there's a municipality in the news recently because there have been some accidents on roadways with LED lights, and some of the neighbors in the area have claimed that it's as a result of the change in lighting. But can we just hear a little bit more about I'll call it the LED conversion project? Is there a way to move that ahead of what's talked about in this report?
Madam Director, please.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. I've been in some discussions with the treasurer about this project. When we were discussing where to put it on the capital forecast, there's really two main options for conversion. One is a little bit more capital intensive and one is less. And we were also talking about the possibility of finding some funding that could go towards this. So we had said between ourselves that we would work on that this year in hopes that we could either shift its placement in the forecast or even bring it forward to 2019, spread it over 3 years rather than 2. There's a few options that come before us, so that was definitely on our to-do list for this year before the capital request comes forward later in the year.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to hear that. I think, council should consider, and if staff have the ability to do the research, council could consider in advance of the 2019 budget what that might look like, and see if there's some possibilities there. The conversions, as I mentioned, are there's a lot of municipalities that have done them and have accrued savings as a result. So it's a possibility for us as well, and I'm hopeful that we'll hear something about that in a few months. Thank you.
So, Madam Director, do you have a sense of how long it would take for us to hear that report?
Through you, Mr. Chair. we could have something, where are we, in April? If you give us a few months to
Sure.
talk to municipalities and find out what's in there, what's out there, we could bring something back in the summer, for sure, well in advance
Does that
of
work?
the capital budget.
That works. Thank you very much, Madam Director. Councillor Kersey.
Just a point of information, Mr. Chair, I believe AMO has been involved in LED conversions and has a whole raft of information and some buying opportunities from what I've been able to read, so they might be a very good source of information for our director too.
I believe our director has made a note of that. Other comments? The motion is that Policy and Priorities Committee receives the Public Works Report, Pickwick Place lighting update for information. Any further discussion? All in favor? Passed. Our next item then is the last under, what's left under old business, 5.2, moved by Councillor Papp. The Policy and Priorities Committee received the Public Works Report, Safer Pedestrian Crossing on Pelham Street for information, and the Policy and Priorities Committee recommends Council approve the removal of select on-street parking stalls and PXO conversion from the existing PPS in 2018. Discussion. Councillor Lane.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Very controversial issue, I would say. I'd like to know, from what I'm reading from this recommendation, is that there's at least 7 parking spots to be removed, if I read this correctly, and I'd like some clarification if that in fact is the case.
Madam Director.
Chair, I didn't think it was that many.
Well,
Where did you see that? If it's a typo,
10 meters from the intersection, there's at least 2 parking spots. And within the intersection, there's at least 3, or not 4. And if we go on both sides of the street, there's another 2. So that would indicate to me at least 7 parking spots to be eliminated. And as I came to meeting tonight, I took a chance to count the number of parking spots within the downtown, and I could only count 17 total. So it'd be interesting if we took half of them out, almost half of them out. We certainly wouldn't be doing any favors to the businesses downtown. And I'd just like to get clarification if I'm reading this report correctly or not.
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Director.
through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have that number of spots. I only have the 10-meter recommendation, so should that be something that's palatable, we could confirm the number of affected spots and preferably get a plan. This would be our next step, to get an aerial so that you could see what spots are currently within that sightline area first.
Thank you, Madam Director. Others? Councillor Papp?
Well, building on what Councillor Lane is suggesting, that it would be worthwhile to have that type, through you, Mr. Chair, that type of analysis brought back to us. I can tell you that right now, there is a lot of activity going on with the number of businesses that are downtown that are not operating. One of the things that I keep hearing over and over again is accessibility to parking, ability to fill places. So the last thing we need to do is to go the reverse and take away parking. One of the buildings, in fact, is, I believe, are putting up 12 apartments downtown. We are trying to attract traffic downtown. So I'd be very fascinated, I'd be very interested in seeing what the actual impact will be before we move ahead on any changes. This has been going on for almost a couple of years now. And we need to come to some sort of resolution on how we're going to actually do this. The report itself, you're right. And again, I'm going to use the example that I had the opportunity a month ago to be in the Vancouver area, and I saw something like this, and they actually enhanced it. And I would suggest that there are possible solutions to deal with an intersection like this without creating, without signalization, which obviously we don't warrant it, as far as I understand, through you, correct? For us to go to a full signalization is not really, how can I say, meets that mandate, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I would like to know, I think for all of us, before any type of change there, that will, A, maintain some form of reasonable parking access, plus at the same token, ensure that this is as safe as it could possibly be. And I am going to send some material that I saw when I was out west that addresses this type of crossing in this type of setting. Maybe worthwhile looking at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Director, you think you wanted to respond?
Sure, yes, please, through you, Mr. Chair. So that I understand, the recommendation came forward without the confirmation of exactly how many spots would be affected, simply because it was a safety recommendation from the consultant.
Right.
So I can bring that forward with how those sight lines would be affected. I'm not too sure, other than removal of those with respect to the sight lines, and the other recommendations that we've put forward, if we aren't willing to take the parking out of that trouble area, whether there are other sight line improvements that could be made that would achieve those same results. Just because we have exhausted these possibilities and we've kind of come full circle here and trying to find an effective solution that's cost effective but also helps us reach our safest option, as confirmed through the consulting group as well.
Thank you, Madam Director. Councillor Kersey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, you can't legislate against stupidity or carelessness. You know, we can put all the signs up, we can put all the lights up, we can raise the whole crossing, and if you've got a knucklehead that wants to do a U-turn in the middle of the intersection and take somebody out, it's going to happen. So of 93 crossings, we had 2 near misses. Okay, so, and both of those were from people not paying attention or disobeying the law to pull a U-turn in that. So I recognize that there is some problem there, but I think from the time and energy that we've spent in it, we've progressed very little from where we were 2 years ago or 3 years ago when this first was brought forward. It seems to me, and I'll just comment on the parking issue, I think the main sight line is affected by the left-hand turns off of Churchill onto Pelham Street, and the parking in question are probably the 1 or the 2 that are directly in front of the church. I don't think the 3 that are across in the intersection themselves are an issue, and there's a private parking lot directly to the I guess it would be to the south of the intersection, so we don't have parking on the street in that area anyway. So it's most likely the 10 meters commenting on the 2 that are in front of the church. Any reduction in parking there will be impactful in the downtown. There's no question about it. When we redid that street, everybody swore up and down that we changed the number of parking spots there just because they were reconfigured. We did not take any parking spots away, but it still felt like to people that it had. So I think we need to be very cognizant of that before we make any decisions to remove parking. I think another big issue there that we really haven't put our minds around is the amount of traffic on there and the speed at which that traffic is traveling. And perhaps that's an issue that needs to be addressed in consideration of this whole mix of things. When the constructor and the designer of Pelham Street, when we redid that, did it, the beautification committee put forward a proposal to make that street very narrow, almost as narrow as downtown Fenwick. The idea being to slow traffic down and to discourage truck traffic. And if we had been successful in convincing the constructor and designer to achieve that, we would probably not be dealing with as much traffic, certainly no transports. And I think that would have alleviated or ameliorated some of the problems that we have. So I think it would be useful as part of the exercise to consider narrowing that street simply by painting narrow lines on. Move the sidelines of the street inward to achieve the narrow street, and do that as part of, it's a cheap undertaking, and it will certainly, I think, slow traffic down. If it does, then perhaps we could look at even diagonal parking on that street, because we would gain footage. And then instead of having parallel parking, we could have diagonal parking, and that would increase the number of spots, and we could give up the parking spot that's the problem child in the intersection. So I know I've thrown out a lot of ideas, and I guess this is where the committee can do these sort of discussions, but I think it's a multi-part problem that we're dealing with here, and I think it's gonna be difficult to solve this entirely, because people will ignore what's there, people speed, people make turns without being as careful as they should be. I'm interested in this PXO crossing, because it's flashing and will draw more attention to the issue.
That'd be a raised walkway as well.
Well, the raised walkway is expensive, and I would say you go with the PXO to start with and see how that impacts on it. Try narrowing the lane to slow the traffic, discourage truck traffic. And, my bet is that if you slow down the traffic, people are gonna find alternate routes to avoid going through the downtown core just to get from point A to point B. They'll be more directed to go there to shop and do business there, as opposed to just using it as a transit. So that's just some thoughts, Mr. Chair. I don't have a motion to that effect, but just some thoughts that our Public Works might want to give some consideration to in addressing this.
Madam Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, early on, engineering did do some measurements to see whether a conversion to diagonal parking could be completed. And without significant construction to change that road profile, especially because we have pavers installed with parking stalls. Without that, it wasn't possible. If we're considering major reconstruction to slow the core down, then absolutely, a whole wealth of possibilities opens up. We did a how might we on this about 2 years ago, and the one box that came out at the end in the challenge map was how might we calm the core. We know that that's the core issue, that's the root cause of the problem here, but in the interim, we have a safety issue at that intersection that we're trying to find a short-term Band-Aid for, to at least take some of the risk out from the location of those traffic signals, to try to get the crossing safe. So yes, although 2 and 93 seems low, both of those crossings were while the signal was activated. That's what's so troubling, is that they push the light, the lights are red, and that's where we had the 2 near misses. The Active Transportation Committee is very vocal about this concern as well, being that it was about a $5,000 to $10,000 capital expense that we would hoped we could perhaps find through the red circled review in the summer. We'd hope we could do that short term, and then absolutely, if it's palatable, to start looking at some major changes to the core, to slow down the core, divert the heavy traffic and slow people down, then absolutely we can open that door up.
Thank you. Councillor King, I think you...
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't want to belabor the point, because we were initially talking about removing parking spots. But in reference to the Active Transportation Committee, the one thing that has come out several times is the length of time that signal, it takes for that signal to switch to the walk. So the person is standing there for, and I can't remember how many seconds it is, but it seems like an eternity, so they think that they should start walking. I don't know if this isn't something that we need to go back and look at, because that could be part of the problem with these 2 or 3 near misses, in that 8-hour period that the consultant was there. So I just offer that as a suggestion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Madam Director, did you?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's a 6-second delay. We did look into that with the region when we were exploring this 2 years ago, I think. And the region said that was a consistent timing because they're trying to teach drivers across the region to get familiar with these crossings. Now, because the legislation changed, the region's preferred new crossover design has changed to this PXO. And I'm wondering partly if they're also recognizing that this traffic signal type installation at an intersection isn't as effective as it could be with the lower lights. So yes, the PXO timing, I'm not aware of how responsive that is. We've heard that several times, that it's a large delay once you push the button to when you cross, and they tend to cross earlier. That would be considered for sure with the PXO.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I think you had.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just first to that, I think, I know we're relying a lot on the region, but I think we could learn a lot from other jurisdictions. I was, the CAO, the director, and I were in Halifax recently, and you push the button, the thing changes, everybody stops. That's how it happens. And for whatever reason, these, yeah, you can't, when you're turning, you can't see that light. And I think we, you know, a lot of people have been saying that for a while, because we had thought, I think when it was first approved, that it would be more lower, more pedestrian oriented. They've had them in Toronto, and they've changed them, I think, 3 times since then, but there were those low orange things, pedestrian with an X on it, and they're hanging there, and they change. That's similar to what's being proposed here in terms of the flashing. I do note again, Halifax has an option. Vancouver, Councillor Papp spoke to it, has an option. So, you know, I'd like to know whether the, what is it, PXO, is that what this is called? The PXO, the pedestrian crosswalk proposal here, PXO, can work without necessarily the parking change. I don't know, is that possible? The other one is that Councillor Accursi talked about the line painting. Yeah, paint's a lot cheaper than raised things and all those other things. So, you know, I think in the long term, we definitely need to slow down the traffic, or the longer term. We definitely need to slow down the traffic and look at those ways in which one can do that. There's lots of examples of where the traffic is slower than people actually walk, they cross, they feel comfortable crossing. There are times of day when one feels that in the downtown, and you can cross and feel comfortable that one's not going to get run over. But there are other times of the day when the traffic is such that people are speeding through there, you know. So I don't have a solution, Mr. Chair, other than, I guess, that question of is there a way to do this PXO, or yeah, PXO, without necessarily doing the parking change? Can you put it somewhere else as well? And I know Councillor Kersey does make a good point, Mr. Chair, as well, to say, you know, the bells and whistles and all those other things aren't really going to stop anybody. There was a fellow that was going 225 on the QEW recently. So anyways, I don't know if we can have an answer from the director, Mr. Chair. I've rambled on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Madam Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the PXO recommendation is independent of the recommendation from the consultant to remove the parking stalls and to install the raised crosswalk. So yes, absolutely, that conversion can be done. There's some changes to the ladder, the painted lines where people would cross, the pavement markings would shift, and the infrastructure is what we would reuse mostly, and we'd have to buy some ambers and some new signage. But that could all be done without the change in the sight lines, absolutely. And to note, as a behavioral thing, I had noted to the mayor this afternoon, Clifton Hill, downtown Niagara Falls, as you're going up or halfway down the hill, there is a band of pavers crossing Clifton Hill. There are no signs, there are no lights, there are no ladder painted, there is nothing. But because it's Clifton Hill, people are calm and slow and looking around and much more attentive, perhaps, than who's driving through downtown Pelham. So we brainstormed and thought we could install a wax museum downtown, but I don't know if that'll work. But just to give you an idea of the difference in what we're dealing with, people are traveling at higher speeds. It's a fast drive. Absolutely core calming is number one, but that's a much larger beast, and we're looking for something short-term to calm that corner until we can think of some long-term options.
Councillor Kersey?
Mr. Chair, if I could suggest to move this forward, I think we've kind of all sounded off on this. Can we perhaps refer back to staff and request a tighter estimate on cost between the 5,000 to 12,000 for the PXO? I'd like to define that a little bit more. I'd like to see a drawing showing the 10 meters of that's to be removed and to improve the sight line, so we really understand what we're talking about here. And also perhaps if you could bring forward a cost on painting lines on the roadway to narrow it down to something similar to what's downtown Fenwick. And so that we have an understanding of what we're talking about cost-wise, time-wise, et cetera. I think the raised crosswalk has been deferred, recommended deferred till 2019. I think let's focus on 2018, what we can do on short term, and then we'll take it from there when we deal with 2019. So if that's appropriate, Mr. Chair.
I think it is. I think you're articulating a motion that you want us to.
Yeah, whether it's a
I don't know whether
motion or
to capture it
referral
all.
back. it's
Perhaps
up to yourself.
Madam Clerk can read that back and you can.
Sure.
Moved by Councillor Kersey that we refer this item back to staff, requesting a tighter estimate of the cost for the PXO, and including drawings showing the 10 meters to be removed for sight lines, and also bring forward the costs on painting lines to narrow the area similar to downtown Fenwick.
Did I capture it?
That's good. I'll so move.
So that's moved by Councillor Kersey. It doesn't require a seconder. Any further discussion?
No.
I'd like to make a comment I'm sorry, Councillor Lane?
Thank you. If we're going to be looking at that and we're looking at sight lines at the same time in this recommendation, I think we should look at the entire area that they recommended that parking stalls be removed, so that we know how many parking stalls they suggested be removed, because it was within the intersection plus 10 meters, so that's, there's two different animals there.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Does that amend the
I sort
motion,
of
or is
thought I
that?
had encased that in my motion, but if
30 feet.
Councilor Lane's
That's
happy
all.
with adding that, I'm good with that.
So we want to add the item around understanding how many parking stalls will be affected by the motion.
Just
Mr.
do
Mayor?
that, if I might, Mr. Chair. As long as it's clear, we're just looking for information. We're not dipping our oar in the water and saying, take these things out before somebody runs off and says that we're doing that. I think
I
what
just want
we're
to-
looking for is more
For
information.
clarification on what the report says as to how many parking slots will be removed.
Thank you.
Now, what I'm hearing, and I don't think this is going to amend the motion at all, but I think that it's something we've got to consider. And what I'm hearing is that what we're dealing with now are Band-Aids, terms been used, and it's not really meant to be the ultimate and final solution to a really tricky pedestrian crossing problem. So somewhere along this piece, we need to get our minds around what it is that we actually want to do there as kind of the final version. And I don't know that how might we that was done a couple of years ago captured it. I'm just wondering whether it isn't time to do another one, maybe a little later in the year, so that we would have some vision of where it is we're going with this. We can't keep putting Band-Aids on this thing and having this come back. So I think, I don't know what a final solution would look like. I hate the term final solution. That sounds, it's a whole different application. But I think we want a solution to the problem that's going to work and get us there. So I don't know what that's going to take. I think that the motion that we're looking at now will take us kind of through the next iteration of the Band-Aid, and then I think we need to really buckle down and see what the total solution would be. Councillor Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think we're missing one very important element in the fact that any moves that are going to be anticipated, how are they going to affect our downtown and our business people? So I think definitely we need to give proper consideration to them and perhaps a consultation, excuse me, with some of them to, perhaps they've got a suggestion that may help in coming to a final solution. We're looking at the Active Transportation Committee, which definitely gives us a lot of good advice and a lot of good ideas. However, anything that's going to happen, as indicated in early discussion here, can and will impact upon everything that happens in the downtown. So in fact, we need to keep that in our minds before we start jumping to conclusions and doing other things. So we got to look at how this is going to impact on everything. So I think that's a very important part of the question, and perhaps direction in that regard. Following that motion is necessary because, like I say, it's a very important factor to see that the needs of our downtown are met. That's
Thank
my
you.
thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Durley. Any further comments? Then let me call the question on the motion. Do we want to read the motion again? Madam Clerk?
Moved by Councillor Kersey to refer this matter back to staff and request a tighter estimate of the cost for the PXO, and to include a drawing showing 10 meters to be removed and including the parking stalls that would be impacted for sightlines, and also bring forward a cost on painting the lines to narrow the lane similar to that in downtown Fenwick. And then there was mention to defer the crosswalk to 2019 and do the short-term investigations, but I don't have that as part of the motion.
No. Nor the suggestion with regard to involving businesses in the area and other stakeholders.
I have that as
Great.
notes in my file, though.
Further discussion? Call the question. All in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Brings us to item 4, new business. It was moved by Councillor King that the committee receive the 2018 water wastewater proposed budget, and that the committee recommend that council approve the 2018 water and wastewater proposed budget as amended, and that a 3% increase in the water and wastewater rates be effective for 2018. This is equivalent to 3.13 annual increase per $3.13.
That's not the amended motion.
That's not the amended motion?
No.
I'm sorry? What am I to be looking at?
So the increase is the water wastewater rate of 3% for the fixed rate only for the water wastewater, which is equivalent to $1.46 per bill or $8.76 per year. Part of the PowerPoint, the second last page of PowerPoint. Yeah.
So it's not in this one.
It's in the amended report that was circulated late this afternoon.
Just looking for the motion.
She can do her report and I'll get the motion for her.
Okay, so why don't we hear the report while the motion is being
Yeah, it's on the
looked for?
amended report.
Yes, I see it.
Yep. Okay, so through you, Mr. Chair, I'm
Thank you,
here
Madam
to-
Treasurer.
Okay. I'm here to present the 2018 water wastewater budget. Just wait till that's on. Okay. So, we have a two-tiered system with the Niagara region that's responsible for the treatment and supply of water. The water wastewater rates are set by the region and has been adopted and approved for the rate. So once that's set, then we can do our budget. And the region has increased the 2018 rate by 2%. So the water and wastewater rates are charged to the users based on fixed costs and also on the consumption usage. The water and wastewater budgets have costs that are approximately 80% fixed. The town only bills the ratepayers approximately 29% fixed for water and 46% fixed for wastewater to ensure that consumption is the main factor in the price. So this encourages people to conserve water, and so it's pay-for-use type of service. Some of the impacts in setting the rate, continued conservation. We're encouraging folks to continue to conserve water. The rainfall throughout the year definitely has an impact on the usage. If it's a rainy summer, people use less water, and so that has an impact. The region's approved rates has an impact on our rates. The wastewater flows are based on the 3-year rolling average at the region, but it's billed at the water consumption rate of the town. And also the water wastewater rate study was done in 2006. That's the last time that study was done. So we're due for an update on that. The water rates, the fixed rate charge. So how that's determined, we take the total water budget, almost $2.5 million, and then there's the fixed cost, the fixed amount, and the total amount that's required to be covered by the consumption rate is $1.5 million. And so when you take that amount divided by the forecasted flows that we're going to have, then the annual rate is 1.3275 per cubic meter, and that the recommendation is not to have a change from 2017 in that rate. This diagram here, the blue line represents the Niagara region, the water that's flowed from the region. The green line is the town's water that's billed. And so if you look at the 3-year average, you see it's 1.2. The 5-year average is almost 1.2, and the 2018 forecast for the water is almost 1.2 as well. So that's where we determined the flow for the water. The wastewater rates, the fixed charge, the same type format. You take the total wastewater budget, 45.72% of that is a fixed cost, and then the total amount that's required to generate the revenue is from the consumption, which is $922,500. So with that, we divide it by the forecasted water flows. The consumption rate is 0.9119, which is the same rate as 2017 with no change. So on this diagram here, it shows the blue, once again, is the region. It's the wastewater that's treated by the region, and the green shows the billing from the town. And there's the 3-year average, 5-year average, and then the 2018 forecasted wastewater billing that we have. And you can see the reasonableness of the numbers there. And then sample water billings, what does this mean for the residents of Pelham? Fixed rate is increased by 3% and the usage rate is not. It means that per billing, it's going up $1.46, and for the year, it's $8.46. If you look at how this compares to the rest of the municipalities in the region, there's 2 municipalities that are not here, and that's Wainfleet and Grimsby, because some of theirs are, Grimsby goes through their taxes for part of it, Wainfleet does not have the meters. So the other municipalities are here. The town of Pelham is the lowest. This is for a 2-person household. If we look at a 4-person household per month, the town of Pelham's rates are still at the lowest in the region. And so the recommendation is to increase the water wastewater rate by 3% for the fixed rate only, which is equivalent to $146 per bill or $876 per year. And also what's important is I think we're due for a water wastewater rate study along with a sustainability financial plan, which is required by the Ontario Water Regulation 45307. So every 5 years, that report has to be done, and it's due in 2019. So I'm recommending that we do those 2 studies in 2018 in preparation for the 2019 budget. I don't know if you want that motion back. Questions?
Questions for the treasurer? Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. So, Madam Treasurer, when this report was released to the public, the recommendation was to increase not only the fixed rate by 3%, but also the consumption or volumetric rate. So this is only now, what you're recommending is for the fixed rate, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And also, I've distributed to the councilors, this is the section of the user guide, and there are some increases here. They talk about the fixed rate increases that we just talked about now, and then there's some other small increases that we have as well that we're recommending that needs to be increased just to be in line with what other municipalities are doing, and also some of these rates have not been increased in a while. And that's the other amount, that's the other item that we're looking for approval.
Comments, questions? I guess. We've gone a number of years now without any rate increases.
4 year, this is the 5th year,
Third year without a
4
rate
years,
increase.
sorry, since 2013.
This will be the 5th year.
So this will be the 5th year without
fifth
without a
year.
rate increase. And I have no question with regard to the data that you presented or the need for the money, but I just can't help thinking that 3% is kind of a sudden number after years of no increase at all. I'm wondering what your thinking is with regard to years to come, and you're thinking about the need perhaps for a policy around rate increases over a longer period of time to keep things at a
I think that's
Reasonable
where,
rate?
I think, through you, Mr. Chair, I think what's important here now is to have that water, wastewater rate report done. What that does is, it will look at the structure of how we actually have structured our fees. You know, we have a certain portion that's fixed and a certain portion that's variable. Municipalities have different ratios. Some of them have a higher fixed amount and a lower variable amount. So we need to have that review after, 12 years. So since 2006. So I think that's key to come back to council. And the rate also, that report also looks at the sustainability of, what, it looks at your budget. It also looks at the future commitments that you might have as far as, dealing with infrastructure, and is there enough money in the reserves to look at the water, wastewater. So it's a critical report that we need to do, and I think that will help answer your question. I don't feel I can do that.
So what would be the timing of that report? Would we be looking at it about this time next year?
No, much sooner. I would
Sooner than
prefer that we can use, there are some red circle capital items in the budget. I would like to use some of those dollars, go out for a tender to get someone to do that report and have it done hopefully by the fall, so we could use that to help us guide the 2019 budget. So
Okay, and-
by the end of the calendar year,
And that will help us then with a longer-term vision
Yes.
as
yes.
to how things will increase.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Any other comments or questions, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, just want to, you said that it's a bit of a change.
Well, 3%.
All at once, but Mr. Chair, I think if you look at it, if you see one of the slides here, this is only for the fixed
Yes?
portion. Water, only 29% is fixed, so I was gonna pull up my calculator here and do that. So it's going up 3% on 29% of the bill, which is roughly 1%. And then for wastewater, it's 40% that's fixed, so it's roughly, I'll say 1.5%. So I guess it doesn't appear sudden to me, it appears reasonable, so.
Right, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't dispute that it is reasonable, or that it's in the absolute dollar terms, it's not huge. But after 5 years of 0, 3% in a 2% CPI world kind of sticks out. So I think having a policy around the long-term way of dealing with this thing, so that we can have
Yep.
increases that are more in line with the rest of the world that we deal with, and on a predictive basis would be useful. I don't dispute at all the figures or that it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, but I just
I understand.
have that note to make. Any other discussion?
So, and
Councillor Pat?
just for
Sorry?
clarity,
Go ahead,
Mr.
Mr.
Chair,
Mayor, finish.
it's 4 years of 0, not 5, so this is the
This is the
fifth
fifth
year.
year.
So it'd be a point on water and 1.5 on wastewater.
I stand corrected. 4 years, and this is the 5th year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So conduct a study forthwith, as quickly as possible. Running out of time here.
Yeah.
Other comments? Call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, Madam Treasurer.
There's the motion.
So, moved by Councillor Lane that the regular meeting of Policy and Priorities Committee be adjourned until the next regular meeting scheduled for May 7th, 2018, following council. In favor? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Maybe we can camera first.